This is such a privilege. Thank you for letting me be a small part of this.
I'm so happy to be in conversation with you.
I wanted to start, I think we all know why somebody becomes a librarian. I think it's a very simple answer. It's the salary. It's an incredibly high, just
Big
obscene
bucks.
amounts of money for a relatively stress-free job.
Right.
But I'm wondering, in your case in particular, what drew you to this line of work? What's your earliest memory of libraries being a force in your life?
Besides the salary?
Besides the salary, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, that's a big story. It's a big story because my family, on both sides, were part of the Great Migration from the southern region of the United States, in this case Louisiana, to California. And so my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Bessie, whose name I always invoke when someone asks me that question, she made it to the 9th grade, but by going to the 3rd, the 6th, and then the 9th grade. So she and her 11 brothers and sisters had to alternate going to school. So my grandmother on my mom's side and my grandfather really were, part of that number of adults that, still today, that really struggled with literacy. And so I think my grandmother must have seen libraries as like some type of reparation, right? Because she hadn't had access. She grew up in the segregated South, so she didn't have access to libraries. So she, by the time I came along, she was 60. So she didn't go that many places, and she didn't have that many friends outside of, her siblings and my grandfather and her children. And so she went very, very few places. And one of them that she would walk, she had that, that rock, and it would take us a long time. But she would take me to the library, and she would let me know she was a Virgo. So, she believed in order and restraint and temperance, like, good Virgos, right? But she let me run wild in the library. She let me pick any book that I wanted, and she let me spend an overlong time picking them, and I remember she felt very invested. One time, as we were walking back home, I do remember her saying, "We didn't have anything like this when I was growing up." So I knew then that libraries were special, but it would be later when I began to work with people who were unhoused and with young people, homeless teenagers, that I started to see like some through lines and a pattern of low literacy, like trying to restore families and reconnect children with their parents. Sometimes when there was like a mishap, I remember waiting in a courtroom for a parent to show up with the child, and we're both looking at the clock, and the judge is looking at us, and it's supposed to be, bringing the family back together, and the parent had only so much time. And I had actually spoken with the mother, and we had gone over everything, and she didn't come. Both the young person and I were disappointed. We go back to the shelter, and like late that night, there's like a tap on the window, because that's like the illuminated part. And when I went to the door, I said, "We were waiting, for you." And she just held up the paper. And what she, ended up saying is that she didn't really know how to interpret it. She, struggled with literacy, and she felt embarrassed at the courthouse trying to ask people, who were also rushing, where to go. And I remember thinking for myself, like, whatever I can do to support literacy, and I felt like libraries were the answer, I want to be a part of that, And so I actually left that job to take my first job in libraries at the Seattle Public Library, and where I also work with quote unquote at-risk youth and young adult services. But that was like the journey, my own, but also like really understanding fundamentally that libraries were sometimes places of last resort.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about between that first gig and now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always been some element of folks who are against a certain aspect of libraries or who want certain books banned, but
Yeah.
it does feel, at least to me, maybe I haven't been paying attention, but in the last few years, like there's been a ramping up, particularly in the United States. And I'm curious how it feels now compared to when you first started? How much has it changed?
That's a really good impression question, because when I was at Seattle, that was in the 90s. It was in the mid 90s, and we were also in the midst of the culture wars. If you can remember, there was like a lot of sanctioning. We had the Mapplethorpe incident and all of that, really kind of clamping down on freedom of expression, especially in the arts and also in literature. And that was the place where I remember one woman in particular came in, and she gathered up all of the GLBTQIA titles that she could hold in her hands, and she looked at me, and I was at the reference desk. I was working at the reference desk that afternoon, and she said, "I'm taking these." And I remember thinking to myself, what right do you have to restrict, the rights of other people to read this literature? And here's the rub. Something that had happened maybe a few weeks ago was really on my mind. We had this young guy, he was like about 16, and he had like this football player built, and he's coming in and he's like double booking it. And let me tell you, for a librarian, what double booking is. Double booking is where you place another book on top of the book that you're really reading. And we're trained, right? Yeah, you're double booking. I see you. You got something that you think that somebody somewhere thinks you shouldn't be reading. And you have the book that you think that somebody thinks you ought to be reading on top of it. And when it's safe, you take the decoy book out and you read. And what I realized that he was reading is that he was reading one of the early, when we had so few GLBT titles. And I was, there, and I'm doing my thing too, and he double books, and then he reads, and so one of these times, I'm there quicker, and he sees that I see what he's reading, and I'm like, oh yeah, if you like that book, when you finish, there's these other things. And he saw that, it wasn't a big deal. But sometime later, this man walks in with him in tow, almost has him by the ear. And he says, and this is all true stories, right? Because we have so many of these stories as a librarian. He says, "Do you know why he's always here?" So he looks at me, and, his son is looking at me too. And I say, "Oh my goodness, are you his father? I've been waiting to see the parents, or to meet the parents of such a great reader. This is like one of our great readers. I think this is a great scholar in the making. And now I get a chance to meet his parent. Are you his dad?" He's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh, you are doing an amazing job." And he's kind of shoulders down, and off they go. So, to me, censorship, it has a face, right? Because the other thing that I know, especially having worked in shelters, especially with teenagers, is that the rate of suicidal ideation for young people who are struggling with their sexual orientation, sexual identity, is sky high. So when the lady comes in and she says that she's taking the books, I remember thinking, that was back in the 90s. I remember thinking, what right do you have? Because you are taking somebody's lifeline, that somebody else, somewhere else, felt the way that they did, had the questions that they did. And so that's how I feel today, right? 30 years later. What right do people have to determine what somebody else can read? And I feel a certain amount of conviction. Now, I was much younger then, right? So I could play it cool. Now I'm not interested in playing the cool. I'm interested in speaking truth to power, to say the only thing that we have, right, going for us as a free society is the right to read something without somebody pulling us by the ear and asking what we're reading and why we're reading it and why we are reading it in a place like a library. So, it's like full circle.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, just playing off that idea of no longer playing it cool. Because I'm basically unemployed. I'm not the face of any organization. I stopped playing it cool. What does it matter? You head up to ALA. Actually, before I get into this, at around the 45-minute mark, we're going to open it up to audience questions. So just a heads up to start thinking of your questions now. I will ramble and go well over the 45 minutes, and then somebody's going to yell at me, and we'll move to audience Q&A. I wanted to know how you think about the distinction between the sort of individual motivation to walk into a library and say, I want this book banned, I want that book banned, or even a small group of, Moms for Liberty or whatever the hell that thing is called.
Isn't that ironic, though, that name?
We tried to have, I do the show and we did an episode on book banning. We tried to get them on and they refused. And part of me was angry, part of me was very happy that happened. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
There's that, but then there's the state level. There's institutions and power systems that get behind the same motivation. I'm wondering how much more malicious that feels, or if you think differently about combating one versus the other.
They're all connected, right? Because the people who are being kind of radicalized, right? Kind of roped into censorship, who are being told, if you want to be a good parent, you need to ban these books, are not actually reading the books. Now, I've made it my business to read everything that I can and to go to as many hearings as I can. And if I had a dime for every time someone says, I haven't read the book, but I still want it banned, all right? They would be like, you get a car, and you get a car, right? Because it just happens too much, right? So I think also too, we have to connect the dots. I mean, we have been, especially in the US, we have been struggling for a long time with anti-intellectualism, anti-science, all of those things. We're also still, at a point where people are considered like suspect, or if the evidence that they share is like informed evidence, right? Now people can spread, there's that through chain, right? First we have misinformation. That's just wrong information. Then we have disinformation. That's willfully wrong information. Then we have information disparity, right? You have good information, but you all don't. Then we have information segregation. You all are going to have the good information, but we don't want them to have it. And then at the end of that chain, we have information withdrawal, which is the most extreme, the most egregious, and the other name for information withdrawal is censorship. Right? So we have been living, it's a perfect storm. We have very limited, it's not funded in the way that it should be today, journalism, and thank you for the work that you do. And we have anti-intellectualism, where we're voting for people precisely because they don't have the information. Oh, they're going to do things different. They're just going to have a knee-jerk reaction, and that's what we need. I mean, listen, that's problematic, right? And then we're at a place now where people are not even reading the books. And so the politicians are not immune. I'm thankful that most people in the US, at least, really believe that censorship is harmful and that it shouldn't happen. But they are, like in the McCarthy era, in the 40s and 50s, when you had Senator Joseph McCarthy banning and burning like 30,000 books and placing authors on the witness on trial. What we had then is what we have now. We had a very silent majority that were just closing their eyes and waiting for it to go away. And guess what? It didn't go away until it was confronted. So what I see now is that most politicians definitely believe in the freedom to read, right? And I believe, even though it's being hijacked, in the name of religion, some of it in terms of morality and that, most people who are of a faith tradition also believe in the freedom to read, because of course, part of the First Amendment right is also the freedom of religion. If we look at that First Amendment right in the US, it is a canopy for so many constitutional rights. So I actually believe that the people who are the most vocal are the outliers. That's why I think we will prevail. But we are going to have to do what Toronto Public Library, one of our great libraries, is doing, having conversations and forums like this where we come together and where we say no more. I hope there is something that I say or that Omar says that will make you leave saying, I am going to stop this in its tracks. I'm going to grab it by the root if it ever shows its head in the same way in Canada. You can do that because it has gone to a part now. I mean, the other day we had 13 presidential libraries say enough is enough. We have gone too far. And, we are now on a slippery slope. So I'm not dismayed at all because it is still a very vocal minority. But what we have to do is intercept, right? We have to intercept and we have to say, you will not prevail because you are in the minority, and we need the majority that believes in the freedom to read, the right to read, that free people must always read freely to preserve a democracy. We need those people to stand up.
Absolutely. One of the things I find fascinating about that minority group that seems to be the most vocal.
Yeah, they're organized.
They are incredibly organized and seem to be playing the game on an easier setting because elements of accountability or consequence seem to be so much smaller. I mean, I was interviewing a former librarian in northern Idaho who eventually had to leave that town. She was getting death threats. She needed police escorts to the library board meeting. And of the many horrifying and fascinating things she told me, one of the things she said was, this group came with a list of 40 books that they wanted banned. And the library couldn't ban any of them because they didn't carry any of these books. It was a hypothetical, right?
Copy and pasting, right?
But one of the titles on there that I found this really, really interesting and terrifying is there's a set of kids' biographies, just, these biographies for children of famous historical figures. And of the entire list, there was only one that they wanted banned, and it was the biography of Frederick Douglass.
Yeah.
You barge in through the door with this idea of we're protecting the children and pornography, and it's clearly in bad faith.
Right.
It's clearly disingenuous. How do you combat that when you actually have to be accountable for the things you say, and you can't operate in that mode, nor would I assume you would want to, but how difficult is it when there's an asymmetry of consequence that way?
Well, I have to be accountable for the things I say, and luckily I work for the American Library Association, whose mission is to enhance learning and to ensure information access for all. Now that's in battle, for all. So luckily, I work for an organization that's really aligned with my values and my origin story, right? That, the right to read is part of reparations. Or you have somebody like Frederick Douglass, whose famous quote is, once you learn to read, you will forever be free, right? Or in 1867, a debate about whether or not formerly enslaved Africans should have the right to a full education. Someone wrote in an editorial in Harper's Bazaar, the alphabet is an abolitionist, right? So I think that, one of the things for me is I've studied and taught information science. I know that, one of the first laws of information is that information wants to be free. So there is, for me, I understand that you can't have librarianship without intellectual freedom. You just can't. But the other thing is that I'm from 103rd Street. So if you send me one of those emails like people do, Ms. Hall, can you tell me why these 163 titles shouldn't be banned? I might send you an email back and say, if you can tell me which of these books you have actually read in its entirety, I'm happy to have a conversation. No one ever responds.
I wanted to ask you about the purpose of a library and the many purposes of a library.
Come on now. This is my question here.
I grew up in a place that had no public libraries and had all the culture was sort of smuggled in, or and the first time I went to the Concordia Library in Montreal, which is where I settled in Canada, I remember being terrified. I went in there to ask for a naked lunch. Somebody told me you had to read Naked Lunch, it'll blow your mind.
Yes.
And I was so scared because back in the old country you get deported for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the spectrum of what a library offers beyond books, the library of things. You want an air fryer, come loan out an air fryer. The library down the street from where I live has 3D printers that you can, and job interview training and all of that. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about both what a library does outside of, hey, you can just come get a book,
right,
but also what libraries have had to take on in recent years as the rest of the sort of social infrastructure either shrinks or is deliberately sort of targeted.
Wow, you have a lot of different things you said in there.
Yeah, I rambled. Feel
No,
free to jump
I
on
mean-
any side of that. Those were like 12 questions.
No,
in
but
there.
then you hear it was like an onion, right? It has all these skins, right? No, that's the beauty of who you are as a writer, and also situating yourself in there, right?
That's the kindest way to say I'm a bad interviewer. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I've been so looking forward to this interview just because you are who you are. But one thing I just want to say, because I do feel like a lot of conviction about this, and I feel very emotional. But one of the things that I love the most, any city I'm in, I don't care where it is, I'm going to always go to the public library. And, being in Toronto, this is one of the great public libraries, right, in the world, right here. I could go on and on about TPL and really mean it because, even as I've, tried to become a better library administrator, this is really one of the libraries that I've studied. I mean, literally studied. And so there's something that was so satisfying this morning, just coming in and standing out at the balcony, one of the balconies, and just watching people use this library. Like, that's what it's all about. We cannot, promise me we won't ever let that be taken away on our watch, okay? It's too amazing. Everybody is doing their thing. It's about the life of the mind. It's about affirming who you are. It's about thoughts traveling. It's about this library can rise to the level of your imagination, right? So what libraries do there is that they allow that sort of elasticity for us to play, for us to imagine, for us to create. They also allow a certain type of civic fluency and civic literacy, sort of an examining of who we are and thinking of how other people have thought about that over time. They allow certain types of things to happen where we can come together and think about things. We're here, those of us who are in this room, we're not just here because of the subject matter. We're here in this room to listen with other people, right? That's the difference, right? And I think that what libraries have evolved, at the beginning of the library, you had the Athenaeum, right? So you had the places for knowledge, and not everything was read. We also come from a very oral culture. Like, why was a book that's also banned, Harry Potter, why was that so wildly successful? Not just because everybody was reading Harry Potter, but it was such a phenomena that people were reading Harry Potter out loud. And what I have learned is that the books that really sell, the books that really rise, are also the books that become part of our oral culture, that people are reading them to each other. So I also want to expand the notion of what reading is, because this right here tonight, this is a kind of reading. Okay, so I think what libraries do also is that they provide sort of like this foundation. So the early library is both the library, the gym, and the museum. That's the Athenaeum all together. It was a place where you exercise the mind, you exercise the body, and you exercise your creativity and your imagination. And I believe that the great libraries are what makes TPL and other libraries, Seattle Public, where I've worked, Cleveland Public Library, I can go on and on and on, the Free Library of Philadelphia. What makes those libraries so great is that there are still places where you can do a lot of that. You have programs around movement, you have programs around learning, you have adult basic education, you have family literacy, you have here entrepreneurship in a lot of libraries, small business development. I think today, ounce for ounce, pound for pound, I believe that the library today is the premier site for learning in our community, without any of the kinds of restrictions. And it's places where we can do something that's really powerful, where we can learn together intergenerationally and with neighbors without any kind of barriers. So for me, the library today is taking us to those places. Like, this right here is what the 21st century library is all about.
Absolutely. I was talking to a librarian who eventually left. She was dealing with all of this.
Yeah.
She was targeted. Her face was on PowerPoint presentations,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And eventually she said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Ironically, she now works in an ER. Her less stressful job is working in an emergency room. What is the ALA doing? What are librarians doing for each other to build that resiliency and the new skill set you need to have to be in this environment?
Yeah, unfortunately, that story is becoming all too common, right? So since 1970, the ALA created the Office for Intellectual Freedom, which, one of the premier spaces to fight against censorship and to fight for freedom of expression, the right to read, et cetera. But in 1970, it created the Leroy Merritt Fund, which is a legal defense fund for librarians who are fighting for intellectual freedom and who may lose their jobs because of their defense of equity and information access. And today, along with the number of books that are being challenged or banned, like doubling in some cases, tripling in others, we are seeing librarians unfortunately be forced out of jobs, be fired, et cetera, all too often. It's become now sort of, it's an occupational threat. It's an occupational hazard. And if you're in the US and you're one of the 85% of the libraries that are in smaller rural communities, you can't just lose your job and get another job like that in another library in that community. So you're risking your profession, the things that you went to, that you got your master's degree for. And also too, there's a lot of threats. We're having a lot of bomb threats, especially in libraries. In the span of 2 weeks, we had 3 major bomb threats where they had to clear the library and close it for a few days. So I think what's happening with the librarians is that they are finding that they need spaces to not only go to support their livelihood, but also their mental and emotional health. So in addition to our legal defense fund, ALA is doing more. We've created this community of care. And the community of care means that when we come together as a body, you have access to therapy, you have access to a massage therapist, you have access to spaces where you can really decompress, and then we're also trying to approximate that in digital space as well. And also creating mutual helplines, mutual aid helplines, so that librarians and library workers who are feeling intimidated by what they're facing at work, have some place that they can go to and speak anonymously just to get help. I mean, we're at that point. That's how dire it is right now, that people are facing real physical harm and also a lot of emotional harm.
And I mean, this is the sort of really one of the few indoor spaces left where you can just exist without an expectation of commerce or allegiance of some sort. And I'm curious, when you're talking to policymakers, the people who decide how much money these places get, or a county level, state level, federal level, and you're telling them these things like, hey, listen, the last thing that we've got is overworked to all hell. People are leaving what are you hearing in return from policymakers? What are they telling you about what is really our last indoor communal space?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because some, the ones who have always affirmed and supported libraries, they're doing so, right? So we have the presidential libraries. The other day we had President Obama talk about the right to read, and he uplifted ALA's campaign, anti-censorship campaign, uniteagainstbookbans.org, hint. uniteagainstbookbans.org, inviting everyone across the world to join the tens of thousands of people, librarians as well as stakeholders who really are standing against censorship and doing things in their own communities. But when we talk to legislators, we're talking to them about all the places where censorship is happening in plain sight, whether that's in prisons, right, which is where there's a lot of information withdrawal, whether that's at the school library. In Houston right now, we have a situation where the school library, all of the books are being removed, and it's being made in 27 libraries, in-house detention centers for young people, right? So we have all of these different ways And so I've done some things. I'm not a good social media person, but I tweeted about it. I felt like this is a school to prison pipeline, right? It got the mayor's notice, who said, yes, keep doing that. They're all fighting there. So I think, one of the things about legislators is that we have to assume that they want the best for our communities. And when I speak to someone who is a decision maker, I assume that, and I talk about the value of the library, and I expect their support. When they don't give it, then that's a problem. And then we can talk about, are you interested in workforce development? All of that is happening at your public library. You're interested in adult literacy? That's happening at your public library. You're interested in reading and improving your reading scores? That happens at the public library. So if you care about a set of values and you vote against libraries, you're really telling on yourself, right?
We're kind of up to the audience Q&A real quick before we do that. I just want to have one last question. I'm sure you hear a lot of bad news in your line of work. I'm sure you hear you've had a lot of stories about things not going as they should.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the opposite. I'm wondering about the last thing you saw or last story you heard that reminded you, like, oh, hey, this is why I do this work.
Yeah, first of all, we will prevail. I'm an optimist because we're going to work it and we're going to make it happen. Like, I am one of those people, right? Me and Wendy and I, Wendy, raise your hand. We solved like so much. We were talking about, we need to do all these adult services and create more spaces of belonging, for people to come together, talk about ideas like this. But I think the thing that has made me the happiest is because I was so close to my grandparents. I've talked about my grandmother. My grandfather was amazing too, both sides. My dad's grandmother, my great-grandmother on his side, she operated a one-room schoolhouse in East Texas for colored children, right? So I have like the education and library thing deep in my DNA. So of course, we've talked about one group that is pro-censorship. The group that has really captured my imagination and my love is Grandparents for Truth. And it takes a grandparent, right, to stand up. That's why I love grandparents, because grandparents are like, enough with the foolishness, right? And so what they are doing is that they are actually talking about how important it is that we preserve the right to read, how important it is that we wrestle with ideas that we may not agree with, and how important it is that we are a society that says, hey, I might not like that idea, but I'm not going to take away your right to it, right? Or your right to access it. And so Grandparents for Truth is a group that I'm really excited by, and they remind me that there are more people who care about the freedom to read and will eventually, hopefully, do something about it than there is, in the opposition. So it's a Grandparents for Truth that I'm really, they're making me smile and making my heart feel really round.
Thank you for that.